organized by Media Lab and Media Factory here at Aalto University. And we have a pleasure today to have Antti Tiihonen here with us speaking. Antti's, I guess, latest achievement is working on the Legend of Grimrock games with Almost Human. He's a co-founder there and has previously also worked in bigger companies like, for example, Remedy and Fat Hammer. And Antti will be talking about this tension between, like, in big companies usually there's only one thing you have to know very well, and then in indie companies you kind of end up taking much more different roles when you have less people. And this is a tension people also have to think of while planning their projects or studying or whatever, how to kind of where to aim their skill set. And yeah, good to have you here, and just
Thanks.
welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone. Is the mic okay? Yep, I got a thumbs up. First of all, I'll have to apologize for wearing a tie, but you know, I thought it'll give me some confidence or maybe even like authority over you guys. I don't know, but there's only one way to find out if it works, which is, yeah, let's get rolling with the lecture. The title of my lecture is Full Spectrum Indie. It's kind of a poor title because, you know, no one really gets what it means, but if I open it up a little bit, it's that US military has a sort of a term called Full Spectrum Warrior, which means that there's an army training program where they train soldiers to be flexible and adaptable to a broad range of operational scenarios. And that's kind of the position that I see that I have gotten into myself. And I truly hope that someone finds a better term for this, because, you know, this full spectrum indie or full spectrum developer, words which I'm gonna say numerous times during this talk, I don't think that really rolls off the tongue very nicely. But yeah, I'll have to give you a warning that this lecture will seem very introspective, self-centered, even maybe self-indulged. I hope you forgive me for that. I'm usually not that way, but you know, I think this is a pretty good perspective and a story to study this phenomenon or a set of skills. And yeah, so it's gonna be about me all the time. But I hope that you can take away something from this talk, that maybe some ways how you can become a better developer, or how you can improve your game development skills, perhaps in surprising ways even, how you might be able to like improve communication within your organization, and how you could perhaps improve the dynamics within the team, the agility of project development. And yeah, maybe if you're interested in that, you could also perhaps improve your bottom line by staying more cost effective. All right, let's roll. There's going to be some amusing illustrations in the slides by yours truly, and I think the slides will be, I'll put the slides available for your perusal after the lecture. So yeah.
Apparently we have a technical disco problem.
Yeah, that looks awesome. Yeah. Everything looks fine over here.
Okay.
The cable is loose.
Okay. Try to be careful.
All right. Yeah, just give a shout out if something like that happens. And by the way, if you ever have like any questions during the lecture, just put your hand up or shout or whatever, and I can like answer you. Or if I speak unclearly, I often do have the tendency of like speeding up my speech a little bit too much if I get excited or whatever. So just let me know and I'll adjust. So yeah, I started off in the industry in 2002, so I've been working for 13, almost 14 years now. I'm mostly self-educated and I've learned from practical experience. Back when I started, there were no games education programs available in Finland, so I didn't really have the option of having like game-specific education even at the time. As was said in my introduction, I'm one of the co-founders of Almost Human, and at Almost Human I do various things. I do game design, level design, 3D art, 2D art, sound effects, music, and on top of that a bunch of things like PR, tool scripting for the artists, installers and patches and web server maintenance, customer support, sometimes maybe even something that might be called programming if you're generous. And yeah, typically I don't praise my skills this much or bring focus to them this much, but you know, since it's kind of the lens that I have decided to do this lecture from, you're gonna hear a lot of stuff about my skills and such. I'm not gonna, totally honestly, I'm not trying to brag to you. It's just I want to offer you this glimpse into my world. So yeah, I started off mostly as an artist, and I went on to do like big AAA projects at Remedy, and then I went indie, and I discovered the joy of working in multiple roles at the same time. And this is pretty much the story of how I ended up in that position without realizing it for the most part, and how I learned to enjoy it, and how I handled the challenges, and maybe what you could like get out of my experience. So let's start off with talking a little bit about Almost Human's first game, which is Legend of Grimrock. How many of you here is familiar with the games? All right, pretty nice. So yeah, Legend of Grimrock was released in 2012, the first part, and it took 10 months of development time, and the series, which includes Legend of Grimrock 1 and 2 on desktop platforms, as well as Legend of Grimrock 1 on iOS. It has sold over 1.4 million copies to date, and the Metacritic scores, if anyone gives a damn about those, are like over 80 for all of those titles. And so 10 months for a pretty good PC game. It's not much by the usual metrics of the industry. So especially for a team who's doing their first like official game of their own. So what kind of a team is behind a game of that sort of magnitude, if I can say so? Here's how the team looks like. There's 4 of us, the 4 founders of Almost Human. There's Juho and Olli and Petri and me on the right. And as you can imagine, there's like a lot of things that go into a complete game. You can't just have 4 roles as in like a traditional games company, an established bigger company where you would have like a tools programmer and then a character animator and then like a level scripter and then someone who creates the story and so on. So naturally there's of course a lot of shared responsibilities in a team like this. And for us, it goes somewhere along these lines. You know, this is a bit of a simplification, but just to drive the point home. There's Juha who does graphics, well, like majority of the graphics, 2D stuff, 3D stuff, interfaces. PR materials, cover art. Olli who does animation for the monsters and environments, as well as a little bit of modeling and such, and also like the running business side of things, keeping the accountants busy and getting the taxes paid and so on. And then there's Petri, our only programmer, who is also responsible primarily for the game design and a lot of the level design as well. And then there's poor old me on the right-hand side, who's got quite a few hats on his head, so to speak. My main responsibilities were level design. I split them roughly 50-50 with Petri. And then there's game design, where I assisted Petri, and then all of the sound effects in the game were done by me. And then the ambient music, like the in-game soundscapes, were done by me. As well as whenever I had the time, I also did some graphics, like the item graphics in Grimrock 1 and some interface graphics as well. So, in Grimrock 2, we had largely the same kind of structure in the team. We had a few additional guys and more time. We had like one animator, one programmer, and one journalist artist on top of these guys. But roughly the structure was the same. I did like 95% of the levels for Grimrock 2 and even less graphics in Grimrock 2 than in Grimrock 1. So the question is, how did I end up in a situation like this? I started off pretty much as an artist or wanting to do art, and then I end up in a position where like graphics occupies maybe like 5% of my time. So to get to this point, we'll have to rewind a little bit further in time. So before even these Fat Hammer games and stuff, I graduated from high school, the Helsinki Senior Secondary High School of Arts, also known as Torkkeli or Tossu. And I had an ambition for video games and art and demo scene. And luckily, after completing like my mandatory conscription military service, I landed a job at Fat Hammer, largely thanks to my connections, but of course, they wouldn't hire a guy who doesn't know how to do stuff. Fat Hammer was a mobile tech company who also did a lot of like in-house games development. They were developing their own 3D game engine for mobile devices in an era like way before like iPhones and other smartphones. So they had a brilliant business plan. They were just a couple of years too early, and I got hired there mostly as a level designer. I wanted to concentrate on art, but a level designer is what they hired me as, and so I end up like splitting 50-50 of my time between like level scripting and level playability and art. So at the time, I wanted to really concentrate on art. I saw myself primarily as an artist, so of course I did all my level design duties as well as I could, and I probably was a pretty good level designer as well. I just didn't realize it at the time because my ambitions were elsewhere. So Fat Hammer was a brilliant company which got into troubles because it was way too ahead of the curve with its business plan. So they ceased like their development of the internally developed games. So at that point, I left the company to work on Remedy, on Alan Wake games and its DLCs. Over there, I realized my dream of like getting to work as a games artist like full time, because now I was an environment artist, and over at Remedy, they often did the levels in a way that there's like an environment artist and then there's another guy who does the gameplay side, the scripting side of things. So it was good news for me. I got to concentrate on graphics, and at the same time, since I had developed a pretty good eye for gameplay, it turned out that, hey, that was a pretty damn good skill to have, even for an environment artist who doesn't directly have to like place any enemies or scripts on the levels themselves, but it's a very good skill for an environment artist to have this knowledge and like intuition about how does the game flow well, and how do you rhythm, and how do you place things in the environment so that the player intuitively knows where he's heading to and what's his objective, and so on. So even if I was like a more purebred artist at that point, I didn't actually got rid of the gameplay aspects of it, and I suspect a good game artist never should get rid of the idea completely that, hey, he's making a game. And also during my time at Remedy, I worked a lot with programmers. I have been doing some programming on my spare time, as well as a bit of scripting for like 3D software, as well as processing. I did some like very primitive sort of 2D visual effects with processing, and therefore maybe I had a knack for like how to communicate with coders and more technical people. So I also ended up spending a lot of time with programmers, prototyping like new visual effects for the games. Like in Alan Wake, there's these inky effects on the screens surrounding the bad guys. I worked on those a lot, and just basically prototyping a lot of like crazy ideas how we could like visualize this dark presence, and how could we like do cool post-processing effects on the screen. And you know, often the programmers needed someone who's more capable of working with Photoshop and 3ds Max and other tools like that. But yeah, the story goes on. The opportunity arose for us to like found our own company. The timing was very convenient for the four of us who founded Almost Human. You know, we were all employed very nicely at our current companies, Remedy and FutureMark respectively, but we were all sort of between projects, so the timing was very convenient for us to like realize our plans. You know, something we had been casually discussing for a while, that hey, it would be cool to like, you know, be your own boss, do your own thing, do your own game, and that's kind of the premise where Almost Human was founded and how we made our first game, Legend of Grimrock 1. But yeah, as the reality in small indie teams is that you kind of have to like, you end up doing a lot of things, like a wide variety of things, just because there's no one else to do them. Games are very complex things that require a lot of different things. There's art and sounds and music and code and marketing and all sorts of things. So you just when you're in a small indie team, you just can't pick and choose what you want to do when you want to do. You just have to do those. And but luckily, it's something that I found that I enjoy very much. You know, I like to have my spoon in many different soup pots or whatever. You know, I enjoy working with gameplay. I enjoy working with graphics, and I enjoy working with audio, which was kind of a surprise to me. You know, we never really planned on me doing the sound effects for Legend of Grimrock 1. I just kind of ended up in that position pretty organically. For a long time, I had been like on my free time working with electronic music, composing electronic music with like trackers and digital audio workstations and such. So it gave me some capabilities of working with sound effects as well. Of course, there was a lot of stuff for me to learn, but hey, no problem. I still was the most proficient of us four to do sounds in a game, so I just went ahead and did it, and I don't know, I'm pretty pleased with the results myself. Like some reviewers have even said that, hey, the audio is great, and yeah, I'm very glad to hear that someone who should be regarded as an amateur in this regard still manages to like squeeze out something usable. But then the flip side is that since we had Juho in the team, who was very proficient at art and who was able to crank it out very quickly at a very high quality, so it made sense to me that I would concentrate on these other areas like level design and audio, where the others were not as proficient. So that also meant that something that I had considered to be my passion, which is graphics in video games, I didn't have that much time to do that part of the game anymore. So, you know, it was kind of an identity crisis for me, which I'll get into more depth in a later part of this lecture. But yeah, with Grimrock 2, the responsibilities stayed pretty much the same. They shifted around a little bit. I had more levels. I did even less graphics. And one interesting thing that we encountered during the early times of Legend of Grimrock 2 development was that I said that, okay, I'm not a professional when it comes to sound. I think we could get much better results and much more efficiently if we use like a professional sound designer for the work. You know, I didn't regard my skills as a sound designer very highly, at least at the time. And yeah, we ran a few trials with a few pretty good professionals, and it turns out that, hey, it takes a lot of work communicating with these guys. You know, we have to like write out specs that what kinds of sounds do we need, and we have to like record videos where they could like do their sounds over so that they have some material to work their timings and such. And there's just a lot of like arranging, and since we don't have like an extra guy who would act as a producer for audio, we just said, okay, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this that way, because, you know, back when I was doing the audio, the response time was pretty much instantaneous. Someone said that, hey, I need some sounds for this, and like 30 minutes later or whatever, the monster would have at least some version of sounds. And also one thing that we noticed that stylistically, sort of the style I was doing the audio in was much more suitable for the game rather than what we had with the sound designer trials. Maybe it's because I had like more intimate knowledge of the game, which I could use in doing the sounds, but still this, the style of audio, it just worked much better for our purposes or what we wanted out of the game. So, I'm still not claiming that I'm the best audio designer out there, but I can definitely say with confidence that I was the best match for the project. It made sense in every way, even though I still had to like be in 10 places at one time, since I had a lot of things to do in addition to the sound. But yeah, it's something that I really learned to like cultivate and enjoy when working on these Legend of Grimrock games. And I've always had like a lot of creative hobbies and interests, and I've always had kind of the attitude that, hey, it's fun to learn new things. And one pretty good way of doing this sort of cultivation of skills that you might not otherwise use is game jams. You're all familiar with Ludum Dare game jams, right? Yeah. So I've done a bunch of those, and you know, I'm not a programmer, but I've done a bunch of like game jam solo projects where I'm solely responsible for all the features in a game in a pretty short span of time. So anyways, back in 2011, sometime after shipping Legend of Grimrock 1, a Ludum Dare was coming up, and I just wanted to take part in it. It was something that I had been wanting to do for a long time. So at that point, I had never programmed a game before. I had been doing a bunch of level scripting, yes, and doing very simple visual effects in 2D, but I had never done a game. So it was a pretty interesting challenge. And you know, the Ludum Dare was gonna start in 2 days. It was gonna be held over the weekend, and it was Thursday when I like installed the games engine that I was gonna use. The engine was called Love, with O umlauts, Löwe. And it's a pretty basic 2D Lua games framework. And I installed that on Thursday, studied it on Friday, and then the game jam was from Saturday to Sunday. So this is what I ended up with. It's a simple game where you fly around, collect keys, and escape to the next zone. I concentrated mostly on graphics, which you can probably see on the screenshots, but I was very, very happy with that. Hey, I managed to push myself so far that I managed to make a game in 2 days, and I had never done a game entirely by myself before that. You know, the source code was like, if I take a look at it now, it's super crazy. I didn't know. I had no clue about like object-oriented programming. It's total spaghetti mess, but hey, it worked. That's all it takes in Ludum Dare. There's some more Ludum Dare projects that I took part in. The next one, I changed the engine to ActionScript/Flash. I used a games framework called Flixel. I don't know why I changed. Oh yeah, actually I do. I wanted the game to run in a browser because, you know, Ludum Dare at that point had like a huge influx of games, and no one would play the games unless they run in browser. So I needed something that runs in a browser. So Flash comes to the rescue. And the next game, I changed engines again. I had never programmed C# before. I switched to Unity. This game actually did pretty well. I think it placed like number 32 overall, with like hundreds of entries in it, or thousands maybe. Yeah, the next game last year I changed to Unreal Engine. I'm not a programmer, but still maybe that's the reason why I can change like engines so easily, because I don't have very deep intricate knowledge of any language, so I don't lose much by changing those. And yeah, this very recent. This is what I did in the beginning of this year. Maybe Ludum Dare was getting pretty routinous at this point. You know, too easy or whatever. I don't know. It's definitely not that, but still I craved an additional challenge. So there's this Variety Mega Jam challenge that runs for the first 10 days of the year. And the goal of the game jam is to make 10 games during those 10 days in different genres. You know, you can't like make 10 Infinite Runners or whatever. So I managed to make 7 games in Unity. It's a great experience. I very deeply recommend it for you guys if you wanna like find new challenges. But yeah, I was pretty happy with what I got. I made my life a little bit easier by, you know, picking a color palette and style beforehand, and I would use like sort of the same framework for all of those games. So they kind of sort of shared workload between them, so I wouldn't have to do like all the basic stuff over and over again. And yeah, there's like a bunch of other creative endeavors I do. You know, like I said, I compose electronic music and I program stuff, and I do photography and I do drawing. All of these things, they're not directly related to game development, but I find that they actually help me out quite a bit in game development regardless. You know, I've found that photography, for instance, has helped me to be a much better level designer. When working on levels, it's very much about composition, how you compose the picture. How can you lead the player's eye to where you want to lead it to? Simple, you just use the rules of composition from classical art, from photography. And the way you place the elements on the screen, you can manipulate the player to go where you want to without the player even realizing that he's being led there. Drawing as well. Of course, drawing is very relevant when working on textures, but when you're like modeling 3D objects, it actually helps quite a bit, because it develops this sort of acute knowledge of shape and visuals and things like that. You know, they all share some sort of like same creative pool out of which all of these skills can like take energy from. But yeah, I had gotten myself into the situation where I work on a bunch of things, so which was pretty strange position for me. It was nothing that I planned to do. And I was happy with what I was doing, and I was happy with the quality of my work as well. But I didn't really know how to define my role as a game developer at that point anymore. You know, if I were to like apply for a job somewhere, I wouldn't know what job would I apply for. You know, I'm not quite an artist, I'm not quite a sound designer. I don't know what I am. So at that point I started to like analyze my situation, and I realized that, hey, maybe here's something that I could teach to others, and maybe there's something that I could tell to organizations that, hey, why wouldn't you hire someone like me to do all of these things? Maybe shake up the old structures. I mean, of course, we're in a very, very new industry, but still there are some structures that have sort of calcified in a lot of the larger organizations especially. And I also think that a lot of us are very sort of multi-talented by nature as well. I mean, we're interested in numerous different creative things. By nature, I don't think that anyone has a passion for like character animation programming. The job titles that some people have, I don't think that they necessarily match very well with the desires of people in larger productions especially. So could there be like some space there, for some wiggle room, how you could encourage this behavior of like doing a bunch of things or doing things in a more unorthodox manner? I don't know. It just seems to me that a lot of organizations are missing out on a lot of potential that the individual developers might have. So, the title on my credit card, it came from one YouTube video that no one else wanted to do at Almost Human, but someone had to do it for one of our game distributors. So I got the short straw, and I was seated in front of camera to talk about our game. And then one YouTube commenter said that I'm the Steven Seagal of games industry based on my very enthusiastic acting in front of the camera. So I've carried that title with pride ever since then. But yeah, I don't subscribe to his pro-Russian politics or anything like that, but as an actor. But yeah, following this identity crisis, I realized that if you take a look at games history as a whole, in historical context, it's actually okay to be like this full spectrum developer, because that's how everything started out. All of these games were like 1 or 2 man operations. There's usually just a single designer who does the whole damn thing, and only when things like 8-bit games consoles roll in, then the team sizes start ramping up very slowly though. And yeah, now we're at a position once again that like micro-sized or even solo teams are a possibility once again. It's partially in thanks to games engines, engines like Unity 3D or Unreal Engine or maybe Amazon Lumberyard as well. You can get those for a very cheap price or no price at all. And Game Maker kicks ass as well. You can basically get like any kind of engine you might need off the shelf almost. And also the distribution channels for games have opened up as well. You don't have to like do physical copies of games that you distribute to like 1 million shops around the world. But online stores like Steam, GOG.com, itch.io, all of those are like totally accessible for like even individuals, and App Store on iOS and Google Play on Android. All of those are like super easy to get into with like boilerplate contracts. You don't need a lawyer. So, why would I want to be like a full spectrum developer? You know, why since almost human now has like more resources and whatever, I could very well pick a position I like and then hire others to do the things that I wouldn't want to do or that I'm less inclined to do. You know, if I wanted to, I could be like a full-time graphics artist now once again. But there's some advantages to this approach that can't be like patched very easily or cheaply. One thing is that you can, I think you can get more work done simply. A lot of it has to do with like scheduling. When you're scheduling your work, no matter how perfectly you do, there tends to be gaps in the schedule. You know, you're doing something, you complete it, and then you're spending some time wondering about what you're gonna do next. But if you have like multiple disciplines and like a lot of work coming to your table, it's very easy to like pick the next task without stopping in the meanwhile. And you also get to work on a wider variety of things, which kind of decreases the battle fatigue, you know, so you don't get tired as quickly, so that way you also get more work done. And it's simply more fun to have variety in your work, you know. No one wants to be the factory worker here where he like, I don't know, does sausages all day long, the same mechanical task repeatedly ad nauseum. And then I also think that quality of work increases as well when you're doing numerous different things. Often people think that if you're kind of like the jack of all trades, you're master of none. I don't think it completely applies here, since your breadth of skills enhances the depth of those skills too. Like I said previously, everything I learn about drawing makes me a better modeler. Everything I learn about photography makes me a better level designer. You know, all of those things feed into each other's. You know, even if it's not directly applicable to what you're doing, it can definitely like enhance your output. And yeah, probably the primary reason why I choose to work this way is that learning is fun. I mean, it's very difficult, at some point it's very difficult to learn new things when you're like getting into like super expert territory. All the new nuggets of information are going to be increasingly difficult to dig out, but you know, if you pick a new subject, a new hobby, you're going to learn a lot of new things at a very, very quick pace. And I don't know, your brain probably likes when it learns new things and gives like a small dose of some hormone which makes you briefly happy. And that kind of feedback loop seems to work for me very well. I don't know. It's very easy to like stay happy when you're like all the time like discovering new stuff. And yeah, so sometimes the reality is that you end up in a position where you just have to do a lot of different things, a lot of things that you never planned to even do. So it's better to be prepared for everything. All right, so briefly about how developers like me could be like taken advantage of. Well, that sounds kind of bad. How you can get like the most out of people who want to do a bunch of things. So In small teams, it's kind of straightforward. In indie teams, it comes naturally most of the time. Of course, it helps keeping the team size to a minimum. Indie startups rarely have like an infinite amount of money, so having like a minimal headcount is of essence. But also it makes things easy to manage. You know, when you have a team of say less than 10 people, you don't need any like middle management. You might not need producers, especially so if you're already a little bit experienced developer. You don't need anyone whose role is specifically and only to like tell other people what they need to do. You can coordinate it along with all your other work. So it cuts out the person that everyone hates, the boss. One tip that I want to offer to to small indie teams is that don't outsource everything without trying it yourself for a while first. You know, if you need that you're gonna need audio or music for the game or whatever, why not give it a shot? You know, just try it out briefly. You know, you can spend half a day on it, or a day, or if you start liking it, a week. And basically the only thing you can lose is time. I mean, of course you don't have a lot of time either as an indie startup, but still time is pretty much free because your salary is probably zero. So when you give something like this a shot, even if you know that you're not gonna end up doing it yourself, but you're gonna hire someone else to do it, you're gonna learn a lot while you're doing it. I mean, not just only about doing the activity itself, but about what you need to order from that outsourcing partner. You know, yeah, you're gonna have much clearer vision of the style and technical limitations of the assets that you're gonna order. So in the end, you might actually end up saving time and money when you at least give it a shot yourself. And hey, if everything turns out exceptionally well, you might discover that you can handle the whole thing yourself, so you actually end up saving a lot of money that would otherwise go to someone outside your organization. But yeah, larger organizations, they're more tricky, they're more traditional, they're more slowly moving, and the things that they do, yeah, sure, they do need those very expert developers who do a very narrow field, like this guy is responsible for programming the animation systems. He's like the support programmer of a character animation. But still, I think there's a lot to gain. You know, for instance, communications between departments in large organizations is a very common problem. Everyone complains about communication in like bigger games projects. But these full spectrum developers, they're actually excellent contact points between departments if they like operate in all of these different disciplines. You know, me, for instance, when I was at the Remedy and I worked a lot with programmers, I often ended up being like sort of this diplomat between those departments as well. You know, I spoke both of their native tongues, so I could like interpret what the other was saying or needing or whatever. And you know, just generally, if someone hangs around in different parts of a building, that tends to by nature sort of enhance the communication between those rooms. But yeah, a big challenge here is that companies often have very rigid structures, and the positions of the developers are very specialized. So it can be a challenge to like convince them that, hey, this is something that maybe you should look into. But I can't really find any great reasons why some organizations should be as rigid as they are. You know, maybe it's just that the human resources like simple job descriptions, or that producers like simplicity so they can shuffle around the developers. You know, it's easier to shuffle the individuals as resources. You know, I take 1 week of programming and move it here, and I take 2 weeks of art and move it to this team. You know, if people do a single thing, it's very easy to shuffle people around like that. But yeah, I think a good solution for that is that when you're hiring people, don't hire for positions. I mean, sure, you might have the advert out for games artist, character artist, whatever, but don't hire positions. Hire the people behind the positions. Hire the people who apply. Look into what skills they have, and especially what skills they want to learn. You know, ask them where do they see themselves in like 2, 5, or 10 years, or what new things they would like to learn while they're working for you. And, you know, offer people some flexibility. And take their like personal goals into account. You know, if you have an artist who's interested in technical side of things, and then you have a programmer who's interested in the visual side of things, hey, why not put those guys together? They could learn a lot from each other. You know, you don't have to like put them to work on a task force together or anything. Just seat them together, and they will like kind of suck the knowledge out of each other's. And yeah, while scheduling, leave some wiggle room in there. Don't pack your schedules too full. I mean, I suppose that's a healthy advice for anyone, because, you know, schedules will be vandalized along the way by forces you can't control. And if you want to go even further, you could encourage people to like work and train outside of their given positions. You could organize game jams, you know, maybe even game jams where you say that, hey, all the programmers now do art, and all the sound designers now do code, and so on. It feels kind of sadistic, but I think it would be loads of fun. And yeah, you can organize workshops where people will teach others how to do things. You know, you can take a programmer and let him give an introductory like processing or Codia class for artists who want to like program visual things, or let a character artist hold like a figure drawing class. You know, there's plenty of opportunities to like do things just for fun, but for profit at the same time. You know, it's kind of underhanded, but I think like that's one of those situations where everybody wins. And yeah, don't be don't spare your resources too much. I mean, if there's a programmer who feels like he would need Photoshop, sure, let him have it. Don't just like give it only to your artist or whatever. You know, just relax, be a good guy. And yeah, one miscellaneous tip as well. You know, if you want to get into drawing but you don't have a clue about it, I can recommend you this book by Betty Edwards called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. It's a pretty good primer for people who want to get into drawing, who have no clue how to start with it. The results can be pretty impressive. So yeah, as an individual, what can you do to train? Just have fun, pick up new things, pick up new hobbies. But a lot of the challenges that you face when training new things are psychological in nature. So be prepared to step out of your comfort zone, like repeatedly. Comfort zone is called comfort zone for a reason. It's very comfortable to be there. It's very uncomfortable to be outside of it. But just make a conscious effort, and sooner or later you're gonna get used to it. As a solid example of stepping out of comfort zone, like last year I went to an improv class. I've never done theater or anything like that, but still I had a lot of fun. And it wasn't like a big commitment or anything. It was like 4 classes and that's it. But still, great fun. There's a quote by Tim Nutke, who's like he was like a high school basketball coach or whatever. Totally unrelated to games development, but they deal with talent a lot. And yeah, that's something that I subscribe to. There's always like a lot of talk about the nature of talent versus hard work, but this is a philosophy that I myself subscribe to. Like hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So, for example, my music skills and by extension my sound effects skills, I'm definitely not musically talented. The thing was that I had been working on my music for a long time, just as a hobby without any like particular ambition behind it. It was just something I did for fun, even though I wasn't very good for it for like 10 years. For 10 years I did the thing mostly for myself until the opportunity to present it itself to like, hey, now I can do sound effects with my skills, and I can do like the ambient music in the Grimrock levels as well. And I tend to like downplay the musicness of my ambient tracks in Grimrock. I tend to say that, hey, those are just sound effects and spooky stuff, but in reality it might be that there's quite a bit of like credit to be given as for them as music as well. There's like over 20,000 plays in SoundCloud for those ambient tracks as well. People probably wouldn't listen to those for 20,000 times if they wouldn't be like aesthetically pleasing as standalone works. So yeah, that's like one practical example where I think hard work truly beat talent. Yeah, and I tend to use 2 approaches while I learn. There's like the playing the long game. I don't hurry. When working on a skill, it takes a lot of time. Like my music hobby, it took a lot of time to get like any usable output from it. But yeah, I got it in the end. So it's good to be patient while learning. You don't have to expect any like immediate returns from it. But then again, every once in a while, you should throw yourself under the bus, like I did with the game jams. Never programmed the game, and then 2 days or 4 days later, I had like already completed my first game before even like installing a development environment. So just slowly build up a portfolio of skills, and then occasionally put those skills to test. And yeah, I'm repeating myself, but find enjoyment in learning new stuff. You should regard the learning experience itself as the reward, not the dream job or whatever accomplishment that you're after. Just enjoy the process, enjoy the journey. Yeah, of course there's plenty of challenges when it comes to working in multiple disciplines like that. Time management can be difficult. It's not difficult just only for you, but the other team members as well. They have to realize that all of your roles might not be like immediately available. If they ask for a sound effect or change in the level, you might not be ready to like change the mode immediately. If you change the mode from, or if I change my mode from sound effects Antti to level designer Antti, depending on the situation, it might take time or I might lose the track of my thoughts. So I'm not always immediately available, because just changing tracks can take energy. But it can also be pretty refreshing, if you're getting tired on working one thing, it's pretty cool that you can switch modes as well. And you have to be prepared to make some compromises. You definitely have to like prioritize things that stop others from working. If it makes your life a little bit difficult to change modes or stop what you're doing at the moment, but still there's someone who can't do anything until you fix something, just stop complaining and do what needs to be done. Yeah, scheduling is always, it's always going to be difficult, and that this style of development won't certainly make it easier. The psychological aspects can be pretty daunting at times. It's difficult to know when are you good enough. Like I mentioned about the audio and the music, I really had a hard time of identifying that when have I reached a point when I'm good enough to do these things professionally, things that used to be just like a hobby among others. There's no right and wrong answer for this, but usually, if you just give it a shot and ask for feedback, maybe they'll be honest and tell you that, hey, you should go back to drawing board and come back in here in 2 years or whatever. But you might also be surprised that they're like really darn impressed that, hey, this is actually really, really good stuff that you're working on. Just give it a shot. You have to try it out. It's a little bit scary, but I haven't figured out a better way to do it myself, unfortunately. One pretty common thing among all developers is a thing called imposter syndrome. It's a term coined by a couple of psychologists in the 70s, and essentially it's the idea of that, or the thought that, how about if the others notice that I'm not as good as I think or as I present myself to be? What about if others realize that I'm pretty much a fraud, I'm just bullshitting my way through the work here? Can any of you identify this feeling? Raise hands. Yeah, that's pretty much like half of the people who admit it. I think the real percentage is considerably higher than that. But for example, right now I have very strong feelings of imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm just bullshitting my way through here. I'm just talking a lot of pointless stuff, and I have no clue if it's good or not. But I just dive in and do it. I don't know if it's working. I don't really care anymore. I've had my fair share of imposter syndrome, so I suppose I've managed to at least somehow vanquish it. at least partially. So yeah, I already described the jack of all trades, master of none issue. Like I said, it's true to some degree, but you know, not necessarily as much as you might think. And yeah, sure, it definitely applies if you want to be like the world's leading neurosurgeon of the fingers or something super specific like that. But if you just want to have fun, make games, you can do it very well as a jack of all trades. Yeah, and in larger organizations, boundaries within teams, it might be difficult to convince others that, hey, it's actually a good idea that a complete newbie like me comes and does your work. You know, it might take some convincing that it will carry some fruit down the line, you know, like 2 years from now on, I'm gonna be very good at this, and then you're gonna be thankful that I can help you out. You know, I don't have any like particularly good advices or solutions. Just know that this might be a problem, that some people can be defensive of their position, or some team leaders might not see the benefits of you like sacrificing some of your precious time to do things that he might not see the benefit of. And yeah, then there's the identity crisis thing that I also touched upon. You know, if you're working on a vast array of different things, you might end up in a position where you don't even know what skills you should improve at any given time, or should you like pick up a new skill? What would be most beneficial for you as an individual or as a developer? It can be difficult, and especially so if you have found your position in a company as a full spectrum developer. You know, you're happily doing like a bunch of different things. You're doing code, and you're doing art, and you're doing audio, and then the company goes belly up and you have to find a new position. People typically don't put up job adverts for positions where you can do like code and art and music, and everything else about the company is perfect as well, so it might narrow your options. So you might need to make some compromises when looking for a new job, or I don't know, maybe set up your own company and make your own damn rules. So yeah, time for some final words of advice or whatever. Maybe a bit of recap. What I have said here, I mean, a lot of it sounds like that I'm preaching. I definitely don't want to say that, hey, this is the way you should do things. You know, it's just an alternative view of like this classical hierarchies that I want to bring into light here. I'm not saying that you should do this or your organization should do this, but you should be aware of these things. And if there's something in this sort of ideology that attracts you, I'd say you should try to use it in practice. I think you'll end up enjoying it. So always aim for self-improvement. No one else is going to do it for you. Not your colleagues at work, not your employer, not your school. You have to bust your own ass to make you a better person, make you a better developer. Try new things that are not directly connected to the development. You know, you can take up ceramics, or do short films, or draw from life, or I have a long list of stuff that you can try out here. Woodworking, sculpture, photography, programming, music, theater, improv, game jams. No matter what you do, you just keep in mind that you don't have to commit. Feel free to give something a shot. Subscribe to a weekend course. Check out a few YouTube tutorials. The possibilities of doing or of how to do this are pretty much endless. Like I said earlier, play the long game, but throw yourself under the bus once in a while to, work on your skills, but once in a while challenge yourself. So, this pretty much is the whole thing. I want to emphasize that, please don't take me literally. I'm just throwing out some ideas here. I encourage you to find your own way, be an individual, and that's pretty much about it. Here's a cool chart of how I see how things work. It's totally bullshit, but that's how that's what I think that makes me tick. All right, cheerios. It's time for questions right now, and I believe he's got the mic that he's gonna throw around for people who might be curious to ask anything. So anything about the talk, anything else at all, feel free to ask.
So, here we go.
Hi.
Hello.
I thought this was a pretty nice talk, and you were not a fraud, so that's cool. I had a sort of question because I've noticed that the biggest hinder to sort of self-improvement is when you're not feeling safe in your life. So do you have a tip for how to establish some sort of safety in your life so that you actually feel free to learn new things?
That's a pretty darn good question. I don't know. I suppose all of us find safety in different things, and I know that starting new things can be especially daunting. But once you kind of force yourself into out of your comfort zone a couple of times, I find that it gets much easier. So if you just manage to force yourself into trying something completely new and strange just a few times, then you can actually start find comfort in doing new things as well. So be prepared to feel very uncomfortable, but it gets better would be my advice. It's not universal advice, but that's how I feel. All right, more questions? Be brave, now's your chance to ask me anything. It doesn't have to be about the topic of the talk even, about India life, about life as a AAA developer, working in a small team, working in a big team. Yes, we have a winner.
Hello.
Hi.
Have you ever considered yourself to be let's say, do you currently feel like you're financially stable?
Am I currently financially stable? Yes, I am financially stable. Legend of Grimrock games sold very well, and yeah, sure, this gives me a lot of freedom to do a lot of crazy stuff or not do things either if I don't want to.
Okay, continuation question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could have done that if Legend of Grimrock would have not sold well?
Yeah, I mean, when we started the company, it might seem at the surface that we bet the house on the project succeeding. I mean, if we would have flopped, it might seem that we would have destroyed our lives or whatever, but actually we didn't have that much at stake. None of us took any personal loan for the project. We self-funded the thing by doing work for other Finnish companies. So yeah, Grimrock games did very well financially, but it wasn't a huge risk in like taking the shot either. I hope this answers the question somewhat. Any takers? Oh, over there. Okay, let's switch the mic. The wonders of technology.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
A continuation of the last question. So, while you were working on the game, you were also the whole team were also working on other projects. How did you then schedule that with your own kind of while working on your own game?
Well, we mostly, or we did it pretty much so that when we started the company, for a couple of months we first worked on like outsourcing projects, and then very clearly we stopped. Okay, now we have enough money. We had like, what was it, 70 or 80,000 euros in the company bank account at that time. Then we just said, okay, this is enough. Let's make our first game in 6 months. Well, it ended up taking 10 months, which was kind of difficult for some of us at the end of the development, but still we managed to pull it off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, are you working on a game currently? And can you talk about a game if you're like currently working on something?
I'm working on a game with a couple of buddies. It's an unannounced title with an unannounced team, and it's still at the prototyping stage. So I'm not gonna go into depth about it. I mean, there's no big secrets or anything like that. It's just that, you know, it might happen or it might not happen. So maybe later.
Yeah. Okay.
You suggested that people should have an idea of where they want to be in 5 to 10 years, or like new skills they want to pick up, or so on. So where would you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
The great question. Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. As I like to stick my hand right into the mud, do things myself, do a lot of different things myself. So I'd like to like publish like a commercial game that I would have done entirely on my own. You know, something that I've done the art, done the sound effects, done the music, done the programming, the design, the whole thing, and then publish it by myself. And it's quite a bit more daunting of a task than releasing like a game jam game or whatever. Yeah.
One more question. Have you ever thought about working on games you don't really want to work on just for like staying or like getting money somewhere? Like say there was this game you don't really like working on, but you just would have to work on it because
because
you don't get any salary.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever really experienced that myself, and I don't really know what I would do in a situation if I end up in a games project where the game itself turns out to be something that I don't want to work on. I don't know. I might drop out. I might just grit my teeth and go on with the project. It depends on so many variables that I can't really speculate that what I would do. Yeah.
Hi again. You told that you went to Torkkeli, which is an art upper secondary school.
Yeah.
So did you have any other ambitions or other industries that you were sort of intrigued by that you would maybe be working in right now if you weren't in the games industry?
Yeah, the games industry was sort of like my primary goal, but I was also interested in graphic design and industrial design as well. But I never ended up getting over there, since I probably would have started studying something along those lines if I hadn't landed my first industry job like pretty soon after the army.
Maybe I could throw in one comment. No, I was reminded of, as many here are also students, reminded of my student times, and also in student projects you kind of have these situations that everybody in the small group notice that you have to do something, and you don't have that specialist hired for that thing. And I remember, for example, myself with a computer science background and more of a designer slash programmer back then, was in a situation where we needed some graphics for a game, and I just kind of had to come up with something myself. And as I was like, well, I can't draw, so I had to come up with something else, so I ended up using modeling clay. So, and that kind of became a thing. Then later on, when we actually got other people who were much better with the art. But like, have you kind of thought about that aspect, that when you do something that you're not kind of a specialist in, you may end up coming up with a new way of doing things which actually is interesting or fresh or weird, and might actually work better than something that the specialist kind of knows how to do already and always does it in a certain way?
That's actually an excellent point that I hadn't like thought about when doing this presentation, but I think it like completely applies, and even to me as well. Like, you know, when I programmed some visual effects doodles with processing, like, you know, simple 2D effects that just do some useless thing on your screen, like experienced coders have commented that, hey, how did you do that? You know, because the technical quality of my programming was like very unorthodox, and it was very crappy in like objective quality. But you know, the approach that I had, you know, I didn't have the burden of this knowledge that this is the way you should do things. Instead, I was just completely unbound by all conventions or good taste or whatever. So yeah, I think that's happy accidents are always awesome, and that's one good way of coming up with happy accidents. Over there.
Hey, I would like to know a bit more about how you got into sound design, and what tools did you learn first, and how was the process?
Well, like when I got into sound design, well, like I said previously, it came from my music background, or composing electronic music. I started off with like trackers back in like year 2000 or whatever, and then after fooling around a while with trackers, I moved into the realm of digital audio workstations, or DAWs, and I got into Ableton Live, which is still the tool that I use primarily to this day. So I still use Ableton Live for sound effects as well. I'm just used to the workflow, and I think it suits working with sound effects quite well.
Thanks.
right, I guess we'll just thank Antti then.
Thank you.
Cool. And as normal, we'll continue with some discussion, with some refreshments in the cafeteria side. So please join us there if you have the time. Thanks for coming here, and thanks also for all stream watchers. And yeah, we'll still have a couple of lectures coming up a bit later in the spring, so stay tuned for more info. Thanks.